Azerbaijan, population 10 million. Baku, capital city, population 2.5 million, and now home to the UFC for the first time in its 30-plus year history. The UFC heads to Baku, Azerbaijan with a very, very fun card and two beautiful main and co-main event fights. First, Jamahal Hill versus Khalil Rountree in what could maybe be a number one contender fight in the light heavyweight division, co-main evented by Azerbaijan's own Rafael Fiziev taking on Igancio Bahamondes in what is sure to be a fight of the year contender, especially if it goes the full 15 minutes. We're going to break both of those fights down and some of the other notable fights throughout the remainder of the card, and it starts right now. A former champion and a former title challenger, a tale as old as time in the UFC's illustrious history, and we get another one here in the main event of UFC Baku as Jamahal Hill will look to rebound from back-to-back losses to Jiri Prochazka and Alex Pereira, but in order to do so, he will have to take on the dangerous Khalil Rountree Jr., who in his own right is coming into this one off of a loss, and that was in a championship bout to Alex Pereira last October at UFC 307. On January 21st of 2023, Jamahal Hill would become the first ever Dana White Contender Series alum to hold a UFC championship around his waist when he beat Glover Teixeira at UFC 283 in an all-timer for the 205-pound division's history, where he got the 25-minute unanimous decision win. And in order for him to earn that title fight, he would have to go 5-1 in the UFC, with the lone loss would come to Paul Craig back at UFC 263 in January of 2021 in one of the wackiest finishing sequences I've ever seen in the light heavyweight division.
Oh my God, look at his arms just flopping around.
And
that
the referee,
is crazy.
just going to stop the fight.
But outside of that blemish, it was victories over OSP, a former interim title challenger, victories over Jimmy Crute, Johnny Walker, and Thiago Santos, a former title challenger. All four of those, mind you, coming by way of knockout, and that is what would get Jamahal Hill to the top of the mountain, where he would take on Glover Teixeira and become the champion, but he would not be able to really garner any momentum following that because he never even got to defend his championship, and that is because he tore his Achilles in a UFC fighter basketball game, I believe of International Fight Week during that 2023 summer, which would force him to relinquish his belt, which is the exact same thing that happened literally just 1 year prior, because in June of 2022, Jiri Prochazka defeated Glover Teixeira to also become the light heavyweight champion. Then he would injure his shoulder, vacate the title, and that's how we got Glover versus Jamahal. Then we would see Jamahal beat Glover, relinquish the title due to injury, and that is when Poatan entered the discussion. So at UFC 295, we would see Alex Pereira have his second light heavyweight fight, and that was against Jiri Prochazka for the vacant light heavyweight crown at the time, where Alex Pereira would go on to become the champion and successfully defend that title 3 times in 2024. And that third and final title defense of Poatan's light heavyweight title reign would be against Jamahal Hill's opponent this upcoming Saturday in Khalil Rountree. But there's more than just those fights that took place in order for these two fighters' paths to finally cross, and it starts in the summer of last year. Because this fight was originally scheduled to take place last summer at International Fight Week, UFC 303, Khalil Rountree versus Jamahal Hill, but Khalil Rountree would be suspended due to consuming a banned substance, and rather than being punished once he was able to come back from that suspension, he was immediately thrust right into that title shot that we just mentioned against Alex Pereira. And in the meantime, in January at UFC 311, we would see Jamahal Hill, a former champion, take on a former champion in Jiri Prochazka, both of them coming in off of losses to Alex Pereira, and Jiri Prochazka will get the third round ground and pound stoppage in that absolute war that those two put on. And Jamahal was ready to make a pretty quick turnaround. As a matter of fact, going to turn around on April 26th in Kansas City, Missouri for a headlining spot against Khalil Rountree. However, he would have to withdraw from that fight due to injury, and in stepped Ian Machado Gary versus Carlos Prates as the new main event. But now the fight has been rebooked here for the UFC's first trip ever to the country of Azerbaijan. Jamahal Hill, Khalil Rountree. A lot has had to happen in order for this fight to finally come to fruition, but it's fight week, and it's going to be a banger. And as for Khalil Rountree, heading into that scheduled bout at UFC 303 last summer against Jamahal Hill, he was on a 5-fight win streak with 4 of them coming by way of knockout. So while it definitely wasn't the most deserving title shot that he would be awarded in October of last year at UFC 307 against Alex Pereira, I've seen crazier things happen, and to be fair, Khalil Rountree, coming in off of a suspension, put up a hell of a fight against Poatan, giving him some of the scariest moments that he had in the the 205-pound division and in his entire UFC career in general outside of those Israel Adesanya fights. And of course that fight also happened before Pereira would lose his title a couple of months ago at UFC 313 to the new champion Magomed Ankalaev. But Khalil Rountree showed in that fight last October just how damn tough that he is, how game that he is, and he had dropped Alex Pereira in that fight. He had won the opening round or two of that fight. But as time would go on, Alex Pereira would pick him apart to the body and to the head, ultimately leading to the 4th round TKO with 28 seconds to go before the 5th and final round would begin. We've got two gentlemen coming into this weekend's main event that are going to stand and trade until one of them will go down. That's just what it is. That's the DNA of these two fighters. For Khalil Rountree, out of his 13 wins, 9 of them have been by way of knockout, and he is absolutely in his fighting prime right now at 36 years old. And in his 6 losses, been finished in 4 of them with 3 by way of knockout, which is something that Jamahal Hill is definitely going to be aiming to target because he has knocked out 7 of his 12 opponents that he has beaten. And much like Khalil Rountree, he's prone to getting knocked out as well. As a matter of fact, all 3 of Jamahal Hill's losses have been by KO TKO. Yes, of course, that one waggy one that we showed with his arm to Paul Craig, but the other 2 clear knockouts to the 2 best in the world at their respective times. Jamahal is going to enter this fight as the larger man in terms of reach and length, as he's going to be 3 inches taller and has a 2.5-inch reach advantage. But when you look at Khalil Rountree and how his stature paired up with Alex Pereira, it was pretty much the same thing. He was outsized, but he was able to find success in that fight. Will he be able to do the same here against Jamahal Hill and maybe even have more success en route to a finish victory, putting him right back in the driver's seat of a title shot in this 205-pound division with the champion in Magomed Ankalaev waiting to see what's going to happen? Is it going to be a rematch with Alex Pereira? And if not, you would think that a fresh matchup with Khalil Rountree coming in off of a victory over Jamahal Hill would tickle his fancy. And the same can be said for Jamahal, because he would also be a fresh matchup for Magomed Ankalaev. So there are very high stakes in this matchup. Not only is a title shot potentially on the line, but both of these guys' relevancy in the title picture for the foreseeable future is also on the line. For Jamahal Hill, this would be his 3rd consecutive loss, and this would send him definitely down the totem pole, albeit light heavyweight isn't all that stacked right now. And for Khalil Rountree, this would be his 2nd straight loss, and it would push him down as well. I'm very interested to hear what you all think of this main event down in the comments below. Will Jamahal Hill bounce back from a 2-fight skid? Will Khalil Rountree bounce back from his title fight loss last October to Poatan? And although this fight is scheduled for 25 minutes, I have a hard time envisioning a world where it goes the distance. And if it does, we are in for an absolute treat in a potential fight of the year contender. That's just the way that these 2 fight styles are going to clash. But I believe someone is going down in this one and crashing pretty hard. Who is it going to be hitting the mat? That's the question that I want you all to answer down in the comments below. And now that we are done with the banger in the UFC Baku main event, we're going to go to maybe even a bigger banger in the co-main event, as we will see Azerbaijan's own Rafael Fiziev taking on Igancio Bahamondes in a big-time top 15 matchup in the lightweight division. This co-main event has storylines for days, as Rafael Fiziev will look to put on for his home country and bounce back from a 3-fight losing streak. Igancio Bahamondes is on the best stretch of his career, entering this fight on a massive surge with 3 consecutive first-round stoppages, and there are major stakes involved, of course, for the state of each of their careers, but for the lightweight title picture, dare I say. And I say that because we are in a changing of the guard in a certain sense for the 155-pound division, as we will see Islam Makhachev moving up to 170 pounds, therefore vacating his lightweight title that will be on the line in just a week's time from when Rafael Fiziev and Igancio Bahamondes are standing across from one another at International Fight Week on June 28th, where Ilia Topuria is coming up to lightweight to take on Charles Oliveira. In July, we will see Dustin Poirier's final fight in the UFC against another man that doesn't have all that much time left, at least in my opinion, in Max Holloway. Justin Gaethje has made it pretty clear that he doesn't have many fights left in his career, and he already has 2 wins over Rafael Fiziev. And then we have players on the back half of the top 10, and Mateusz Gamrot and Paddy Pimblett both surging with momentum right now. Gamrot, a former opponent of Rafael Fiziev, albeit there was an injury in that fight where we didn't get to really see it play out as we would have liked. And another piece of the puzzle worth mentioning in the build-up to this fight is that in the aftermath of Rafael Fiziev's UFC 313 loss to Justin Gaethje, where they would go the full 15, he stated in the aftermath that he was interested in moving down to 145 pounds, said that it would even likely be his next move, but that of course was before the UFC booked an event in his home country and they put him on the docket in the lightweight division. I think that if Fiziev doesn't get the win here over Igancio Bahamondes and goes on a 4-fight skid at lightweight, we will absolutely see him drop down to 145 to try out his hand there. But this is a winnable fight for him, as we have seen Igancio Bahamondes lose twice throughout his 8 fights in the UFC thus far. Once to John McDessie in his UFC debut, and the other to Ludovic Klein, who just got shut down against Mateusz Gamrot a few weeks ago. And prior to the 3-fight losing streak that Rafael Fiziev finds himself on, he was on a 6-fight run in this lightweight division, including wins over Renato Moicano, Bobby Green, Brad Riddell, and Rafael dos Anjos. With 3 of those 4 coming by way of knockout, the only one that wasn't was against Bobby Green. And yes, a 3-fight losing streak sounds bad, but when you look at it, 2 of them are to the very same man, and both were very close in competitive fights to Justin Gaethje. The first one at UFC 286 in March of 2023, the last one in March of 2025, just a couple of months ago, and sandwiched in between was that loss to Mateusz Gamrot. But again, like I just mentioned, there was a knee injury there for Rafael Fiziev that halted the fight before it really got to get going. And at 32 years old, Fiziev is right now in his fighting prime, and he is an elite level striker in this lightweight division, finishing 8 of his 12 wins by way of knockout throughout his career. The biggest problem here for Fiziev that I see him having to solve in order to get a victory and find success is the massive size discrepancy, because Igancio Bahamondes will be 6 inches taller, standing at 6'3" to Rafael Fiziev's 5'8", and will carry a 4-inch reach advantage as well, which is going to play a very big factor in who gets the victory in this fight, in my opinion. As I've already stated, Igancio is 6-2 since joining the UFC following his Dana White Contender Series fight in 2020, made his debut in April of 2021, and finds himself on the best stretch of his career right now in the UFC. 3 consecutive wins, all 3 of them by way of first-round stoppage against progressively better and more dangerous opponents. It started with Christos Giagos last April, then it moved on to Manuel Torres at Noche UFC at the Sphere, and most recently at UFC 313 on the same night that Fiziev lost to Gaethje, Bahamondes would get a win over Jalen the Tarantula Turner and finished him in the first round with a triangle choke in less than 2.5 minutes. He's only 27 years old as well, so alongside with his size advantage, he's also 5 years younger and fresher. He's 17-5 overall, having finished 13 of those with 11 by way of knockout, and has never been knocked out in any of his 5 professional losses, which makes it even tougher for Rafael Fiziev to find a winning method in this fight. Igancio really is coming into his all right now, and it's been evident over the course of this 3-fight run, not to mention he's now training in Chicago with the likes of Belal Muhammad, who is a very highly accredited welterweight, former champion, was on an 11-fight unbeaten streak, and looking to fight Kamaru Usman in the aftermath of UFC Atlanta last weekend. This fight truly has all the makings to be a fight of the night winner and a fight of the year contender. That's pretty crazy that the main event and co-main event of this fight night can both go down as one of the best fights of 2025 when it's all said and done come December. We'll see just how durable both of these men can be, given that Bahamondes has never been knocked out, as we said, and Rafael Fiziev has only been truly knocked out once, even though technically it says twice, because the one was the TKO knee injury, and that knockout loss he had was in his UFC debut over 6 years ago now, in April of 2019, when he would get knocked out with a spinning back kick to Magomed Mustafayev. I would love to know how you see this lightweight bout playing out down in the comments below. Will it be the size of Bahamondes that proves to be too much for Rafael Fiziev to handle in the striking realm, or will he be able to find the shots? Will he be able to close the distance, get into his range, and put Igancio Bahamondes in more danger than we've seen him faced with so far in his UFC career? And while this card is definitely carried by the big-time fights in the main and co-main event, there are a plethora of other very fun matchups on this card that we have to continue to discuss. So next we'll move into the heavyweight division, where the fight that the UFC has wanted to put on more so than any fight ever, including Conor McGregor and John Jones fights. And that's Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev. And I jokingly say that because this fight has already been on the books twice in 2025 so far. It was supposed to happen at UFC Seattle in February, then it was supposed to happen at UFC 313 in March, and now they've settled for UFC Baku here in the middle of June. Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev, a very, very random matchup in this division, and just in general, if I'm being honest with you. And I say that because Curtis Blaydes is a 9-year, 19-fight UFC veteran who's challenged for an interim title. And Rizvan Kuniev, well, he's a Dana White Contender Series alum. But of course, he is also known for being Khabib's heavyweight champion during his time in Eagle FC throughout 2020 and 2022, and then had a brief stint in the PFL where he beat Renan Ferreira, but then would be overturned due to a PED suspension. But Rizvan is 33 years old, so right in those prime years, he's 12-2 with a draw to his name, and of course that no contest. He has finished 8 of his 12 victories, with 6 of them by knockout, and never been finished in those 2 losses. As a matter of fact, the last time that he lost a fight was way back in August of 2015, where he would lose a decision to Justin Willis, so nearly 10 years unbeaten now, and he makes his UFC debut against a top 5 ranked heavyweight in the world in Curtis Blaydes. And this will be Curtis's first fight since that interim title fight loss to Tom Aspinall last July at UFC 304 in London. Prior to that, he had a victory over Jailton Almeida at UFC 299, where he gave him the first loss of his UFC career and starched him with a knockout in the second round. We know the story of Curtis Blaydes' UFC career. He would always win just enough to be right on the cusp of that title shot, and then he would lose in the fight before. This time, he was able to get the interim title shot against Tom, but he would falter in that biggest moment and be knocked out in 1 minute flat. But at just 34 years old, and especially in the heavyweight division, Curtis Blaydes still has time on his side, and this would be a massive bounce back for him, especially in terms of his career trajectory, because if he loses this fight to Kuniev, already not having the best relationship with Dana White and the fellas, this would send him back in devastating fashion down the heavyweight rankings. But this truly, to me, feels like an opportunity for Curtis Blaydes to make a statement and show that there are levels to this game, and maybe I'm just way off and Rizvan is way better than I think he is, but I just have a hard time seeing him come in here and take out Curtis Blaydes in his debut. But it must mean something if the UFC is launching him this far in just his first fight, so maybe I could eat crow. And Rafael Fiziev isn't the only fighter on this card that hails from the home country of Azerbaijan where this event is taking place. We also have Tofiq Musayev from Baku that is making his UFC debut, and dare I say long awaited, because he's a longtime Rizin veteran and a Bellator veteran. He enters this fight on a 2-fight win streak, 3 of his last 4 being victories overall, with all 3 of them by way of knockout, and the lone loss in that time period was to Alexander Chablis via TKO in March of 2023. He would of course go on to challenge against Usman Nurmagomedov for the lightweight title. Tofiq is 35 years old, so a little bit on the edge of those prime years for a UFC debutant, but he's 22-5, finished 20 out of those 22 and 18 of the 20 by way of knockout, and been finished in 4 of his 5 losses. This one is going to be fun, and he is taking on Myktybek Orolbai, who doesn't know what a boring fight is. As a matter of fact, he was in a Fight of the Year contender just a few months ago in October of 2024, and that was against Mateusz Rebecki, where he would lose a split decision at UFC 308 in a blood and guts banger, and before that, he was 2-0 in the UFC with wins over Uros Medic and Elvis Brenner. The former LFA alum is just 27 years old and has a record of 13-2-1, having finished 11 of his 13 wins with 6 knockouts and 5 submissions, and as crazy of fights that he has been a part of, he has never been finished. This one is a fight that you do not want to miss on this main card. And the third fighter from Azerbaijan is Nazim Sadykhov, who is 10-1 with 1 draw, finished 9 of his 10 wins with 7 knockouts. He's 31 years old, right in his prime, and this fight also takes place in the lightweight division, and he has impressed so far in his UFC career with a 3-win and 1 draw record, no losses. As a matter of fact, hasn't lost a fight since his debut in November of 2018, so has gone 11 fights in a row unbeaten. And all 3 of his UFC wins thus far have been by way of stoppage, including Ishmael Bonfim and Terrence McKinney. The other one was against Evan Elder, and his win on the Contender Series in 2022 was also a knockout. That one came in round number 3. And he's also a Cage Fury Fighting alum and a Fury FC alum, so he has a lot of high-level experience on the regional scene and 4 fights already under his belt in the UFC, and he is taking on another Cage Fury Fighting alum in Nikolas Motta, who hasn't had the greatest stretch in the UFC. He started 1-2, but the losses were to Jim Miller and Manuel Torres, 2 very dangerous fighters that finished him in both of those. But he does have back-to-back wins heading into UFC Baku, wins over Maheshate and Tom Nolan, the Nolan win coming by way of stoppage. Motta is 32 years old, 15-5 overall, has 10 of his 15 wins by way of knockout, and out of his 5 losses, 4 of them have been by way of knockout. This is an uphill battle in my opinion for Motta. I see a finish here coming from Nazim, but maybe a big-time upset could be in play in enemy territory. And we had to mention the Welsh gangster Oban Elliott, who is coming into this fight looking to go 4-0 in the UFC upon making his debut after his 2023 win on Dana White Contender Series. And he is a longtime Cage Warriors alum, one of the bigger names to come out of that promotion over the last few years. And as a matter of fact, hasn't lost a fight since December of 2021, meaning that overall, outside of his 3 UFC wins, he is on an 8-fight win streak overall. He's 12-2 as a professional, just 27 years old, getting ready to enter those prime years in this welterweight division, and has finished 6 of his 12, so a 50% finish rate. But I will say, in both of his losses, he has been knocked out. But he's taking on a UFC debutant who just fought in the Contender Series in September of last year and was able to get a decision win, and that is Seokhyeon Ko, who is 31 years old, 11-2 overall with 6 knockouts, and hails from South Korea. And he enters this fight on a 4-fight win streak, with 3 of them coming by way of knockout. The only one that didn't was the fight on Contender Series last year. But man, this is a tough draw for a UFC debut. But this could be one of the bigger upsets of 2025 so far, should he get the nod over Oban Elliott. And last but not least, we've got Tagir Ulanbekov looking to defend his top 15 spot in the flyweight division against Azat Maksum. Tagir will enter this fight with a 5-1 record since making his UFC debut in October of 2020. The only loss was to former title challenger Tim Elliott back in March of 2022, and since then, he's on a 3-fight win streak over Nathan Manis, Cody Durden, and Clayton Carpenter at UFC 311. But before that UFC 311 bout in January, we didn't see him at all in 2024, so now Tagir is looking to make up for lost time with his second fight already in 2025, just 6 months in, and it is a tough draw, but a spot for him to definitely win his 4th straight as well. And that tough draw is Azat Maksum, who is 30 years old, right in his prime, 15-1 with 10 finishes. However, just 1-1 in the UFC, coming into this one after losing to Charles Johnson in February of 2024. So I talked about inactivity for Tagir heading into 2025. Well, the same can be said for Maksum, as he has not fought since February of last year, nearing a year and a half of inactivity. But of course, if our math is correct, we know that he's coming in off of a loss, meaning before that Charles Johnson fight, he was on a 15-fight undefeated streak to start his career. Now, can he crack in to the top 15 against Tagir Ulanbekov? This is a big opportunity for Azat to get a top 15 opponent and a decent name in Tagir after coming off of a loss. That says a lot about the UFC's beliefs in this young man from Kazakhstan. So that is it for the UFC Baku preview, and I want to hear from you down in the comments below. What are your predictions for this fight card? What are your best bets? And what do you make of this fight card in general for the UFC's first trip to Baku? I think we have a lot of very fun fights on our hands, both from a name value and storyline perspective, and just from a general X's and O banger violence perspective as well. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because every single week I preview and break down the biggest and best fights heading into each card, especially for the storylines and what is at stake perspective for those fights, and in the aftermath I recap the most meaningful results as well. And I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the discussion and the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, TikTok, and like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA. And if you're a podcast listener, no need to fear, you can follow on Spotify and Apple, where the long-form episodes are released every Monday and Friday. I hope you all have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.